is there a sign that we could be going back to those days? And who are we worried about? Who could be behind potential terror attacks here in the UK? Is it ISIS? Is it ISIS-K? Where are we now? Well, let's talk to Dr. Alan Mendoza. He's Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Dr. Mendoza.
Good evening.
Yeah, how worried should we be? Is this a sign that we could be returning to those days where we'll be fearful over any potential terror attack?
Well, I hate to say it, Claude-Elise, but unfortunately, those days never really went away. They were damped down, much as everything else was, by the reality of lockdown and by the fact the pandemic was restricting, people's access to places, and you couldn't quite go out in the way you were. But if you recall, prior to that, there was a constant sense this might happen. You got, every now and again you had an attack, whether it was London Bridge, whether it was Westminster. There were, unfortunately, there were Manchester Arena. There were those examples on a fairly drip basis showing you that there were people out there in the UK trying to kill their fellow citizens. And the great, concern is now that you've started with one such attack, are more to follow? And the answer indisputably is yes, because as we know from the large number of suspects on the terrorist watch list, there appear to be many tens of thousands of people who would like to attack their fellow citizens.
You see, I thought that we were seeing ISIS losing support, just waning in its power, if you like. And with that, I thought that could potentially reduce the chances of a terror attack here. Is that not the case?
Well, you see, unfortunately, we mustn't, of course, discuss this case, and we don't know the details of this case. But in general terms, although ISIS has been the most successful, if you like, recruiting sergeant for radical Islam in recent years, it's not been the only example of this. There are people who are not officially affiliated to ISIS, as we well know, because his name's been mentioned in recent days. Anjem Chowdhury, who was, of course, jailed for having expressed support for terrorist organizations. He had radicalized many a person through his videos, it seems. People had gone off to fight, citing him as a source. So you've got these examples of people who aren't necessarily working for ISIS who've had an impact on this. And what this reminds us is that radical Islam is a many-headed hydra. And while the ISIS head may have been temporarily chopped off or diminished in size, there remains a core ideology that can be accessed and expressed through others as well.
So what can we do about it? What can authorities here do?
Well, there are multiple points of how you tackle this. I mean, and you have to look at this, if you like, as a supply chain sort of system, and you can stop it in various ways. Now, obviously, the worst way of stopping it is to wait right till the end, when people are ready to launch terrorist attacks, and then just beef up protection or hope you can catch them at that end. The danger with that is that, as has been said many a time, the bomber needs to get through once, and you've got to stop them every single time. Or the assailant. Now, you go further down the path, well, maybe you can stop them from, kind of the path of radicalization. You can turn them back on that path. But if you've already started down that path, it's always much more difficult than they haven't started in the first place, which then takes you, and by the way, the bit about stopping the radicalization means social media, having control on, what goes on to those channels, kind of making sure that people are not allowed to communicate with radical preachers, things like that. But surely much better is to go to the root of the issue. The root of the issue is that there are communities in this country, and I'm not merely referring at the moment to radical Muslim issues, it can be far-right extreme of others, who feel at odds with the rest of their fellow citizens. They feel that they have a different outlook on life, and they've been allowed, in a sense, to be ghettoized or to be segregated into thinking that. And what the government will have to do is to get to grips with this problem and break into those communities and stop the segregation, because that's the only way you're really going to start developing national cohesion.
Dr. Mendoza, that sounds like an impossible task to achieve, or do you think it is possible?
I think it's very possible, because you can see numerous examples around the world of governments who have intervened in their society. I mean, we're trying to do that now, aren't we, with the concept of levelling up? The government is consciously interfering in communities, for want of a better word.
Yeah, but I mean, actually breaking through to a community, not just a community, a foreign community, right? That they're standing apart in their world, which is a world that anybody would have. But in regards to this community, a Muslim community, it's very difficult to break through. Can governments, can authorities do that?
Well, it shouldn't be very difficult to break through in terms of teaching English as a subject, for a national language. That should not be a difficult thing to do. It should be something that should be perfectly acceptable for government to go and do. For to bring women into the workplace, this is a pretty normative thing to do. I know you say it should be difficult, but the government, the state, I should say, has tremendous power. It's had the power recently.
The state has power, but in your house, in your home, Dr. Mendoza, however you live, whatever you follow, that is what reigns. You have families, and not just Muslim families, even African communities, where you have grandparents who never, even despite being here for decades, never learnt English as a language. How can a government break in there and then force them to actually learn it?
What's the greatest way to challenge that sort of control, as you say, in terms of households having control within them? The best way of doing that is by showing households there are other ways to live, basically, and that there is no actual incompatibility necessarily with following religious beliefs and living life within a largely secular liberal democracy, because of course a secular liberal democracy allows for that. What it doesn't allow for is the building of a parallel society within it, whereby you are following different laws and you're following different customs and not being allowed to break out. Now, there are ways you can show people this. It's in the educational system. You cannot allow people to be educated necessarily in private schools in those places. You will have to be educated in a state school. It is about actually going and knocking on doors and finding out what's going on at home and watching for the differences. It's about making sure that there are not religious councils controlling the space in those areas and that police can patrol as well and issues like that. It's about access. And if you don't do that, where do you end up? You end up in a country like France, which has, as you know, these vast ghettoized areas where the police don't tread and where French law appears not to have any writ. And the end result of that is extreme politics. And look what's happening in France's presidential election. You're having far-right candidate after far-right candidate because they've gone so far down the road of being unable to deal with this issue that some French people think only an extreme solution will work now. And we don't want to be like that. We want to be the stage in a liberal democracy where we can still bring people together in the name of national cohesion. And that is very achievable by the state being able to knock on people's doors and just find out what's going on. I mean, it had no problem doing that during coronavirus, did it?
Okay. Dr. Mendoza, some very worrying things you're talking about there, but so good talking to you. Thank you so much. Dr. Mendoza saying that actually the terror threat never really went away. And the government, the state needs to step in to do so much more when it comes to, if it's even possible, reducing that threat. After the break, I'm going to be taking your calls. I'm talking about Dominic Raab, the Justice Secretary. He's calling on businesses to give ex-offenders jobs. For him, this is the answer to the shortage in HGV drivers. This is the answer to reduce the chances of offenders going out